Shalom, my name is Joseph Shulam, and I'm continuing the teaching on 2 Samuel. We're in chapter 14 of 2 Samuel, and I'm repeating my goal in this teaching. My goal is very simple. I'm trying to understand the main characters of the Bible. I'm trying to understand how God relates to the main characters of the Bible and how they behave and what's behind the story. This is the most important part of the Bible, in my opinion, to learn the character of God and how God relates to his children, to his faithful, to the ones who he has chosen, whether in the New Testament or the Old Testament. That's the essence of our faith. Our faith is not some kind of long hair theological discussion. It is so that we know what God wants from us and how we need to act and what God tolerates and what he doesn't tolerate. All these things that are part of our interest in the DNA of the Bible and its characters. So we're in chapter 14 of 2 Samuel, verse 1. Let me recap a little bit of chapter 13. Absalom designs a plot to do two things. One is to kill the heir to the throne, Amnon, because he raped Tamar, his sister. Ruined her life. Absalom is her brother. They're both children of David and of the same mother. The mother was the princess from the land of Shur, Talmai, the king of Shur. Shur is where the Golan Heights is today, up north Israel at the foothills of Mount Hermon, the highest mountain in the Middle East, and near the sources of the Jordan River. So it devises this plot, very elaborate plot. He does it far from Jerusalem. He's a man who knows how to plot. And so he has Amnon, his brother, killed. Finally, the news gets to David, but Absalom already knows what David's going to react. He killed his brother. David's not going to be happy. So he runs to his grandfather, to northeast of the land of Israel, Golan Heights, on the other side of the Jordan River. And he's there with his grandfather. 2 years pass. It's not clear now to David or to Joab, but to any of the men of David, who is going to be the next heir, because the heir is now, Absalom killed the heir, Amnon, his older brother, and now he is in line to be the inheritor of the throne of David. And he is not in Jerusalem, and he is not near his father, and his father is fuming, mad about him. But he also misses his son. He also knows that stability of the kingdom depends on having a clear person to inherit his throne. Joab, his confidant, his chief of staff, his military hero, the one who, with his small group of men, conquered Jerusalem and made Jerusalem the royal capital of King David, is worried about the king. So he devises a plot how to restore Absalom back to Jerusalem. And here we are now in the beginning of chapter 14 of 2 Samuel. So Joab, the son of Zeruiah, perceived that the king's heart was concerned about Absalom, or missed Absalom. And Joab sent to Tekoa. Tekoa is not very far. It's the city where the prophet Amos was born and raised. Amos was from Tekoa. It's a little bit south of Bethlehem, maybe 10 miles from Jerusalem, maybe a little bit less than 10 miles, but around 10 miles from Jerusalem. And he brought from there a wise woman. We saw a wise man earlier, now we see a wise woman. And said to her, please pretend to be a mourner, a widow, and put on mourning apparel. Do not anoint yourself with oil or perfume, but act like a woman who has been mourning a long time for the dead. Go to the king and speak to him in this manner. So Joab put words in her mouth. And when the woman of Tekoa spoke to the king, she fell on her face to the ground and prostrated herself and said, "O king, help me." Then the king said to her, "What troubles you?" And she answered, "Indeed, I am a widow. My husband is dead." Now your maidservant has 2 sons, and the 2 fought with each other in the field, and there was no one to part them, but the one struck the other. The one struck the other. What's happening here with me? My text is jumping. Okay. And killed him. And now the whole family has risen up against your maidservant. And they said, "Deliver him to who struck his brother, that we may execute him for the life of his brother whom he killed. And we will destroy the hair also." So they would extinguish my ember, my last ember that is left, and leave my husband neither name nor remnant on the earth. Which in Judaism and in the Bible, to have an heir, to have a remnant, to have somebody that will continue the name of your family is very, very great importance, because of the division of the inheritance of the land, that way they were divided in the days of Joshua, and many background beliefs that are essentially biblical and Jewish, that, life and family and tribal identity and family identity is very important. And the way it was carried in the Old Testament is by the male child, the firstborn male child. Only in the 2nd century, early in the 2nd century AD, was the change from the man to the woman inheritance, because of what the Romans did to the daughters of Israel during the second revolt, the Bar Kokhba revolt. That's when it was changed at around 135 AD. Until then, the biblical concept is that the inheritance goes through the male child, not your Jewishness is decided by the male child in the Bible. We see all the genealogies approve that, but it changed to modern Judaism in 135 AD. So the woman complains to the king and says, I had two sons, one son killed the other. Now the community, the law, the tradition is that the community says, give us your second son so we can try him in trial and kill him for killing his brother. That's the law, that's the Torah. And she says to the king, so they would extinguish my ember that is left and leave me, my husband, neither name nor remnant on the earth. Then the king said to the woman, go to your house and I will give order concerning you. And the woman of Tekoa said to the king, O my lord, O king, let iniquity be on me and on my father's house, and the king and his throne be guiltless. What is happening with this stupid thing? The king and the throne be guiltless. Verse 10. So the king said to her, whoever says anything to you, bring him to me, and he shall not touch you anymore. So she said to the king, verse 11, please let the king remember the Lord your God, and do not permit avenger of blood to destroy anymore, lest they destroy my son. And king said to her, as the Lord lives, not a hair of your son shall fall to the ground. Therefore the woman said, please let your maidservant speak another word to my lord the king. David answered, speak on. So the woman said, why then? Again it jumped. Verse 12 of chapter 14. What is this? Okay, back to chapter 14, verse 13. So the woman said, why then have you schemed such a thing against the people of God? For the king speaks this thing as one who is guilty, in that the king does not bring his banished one home again. For we will surely die and become like water spilled on the ground, which cannot be gathered up again. Yet God does not take away a life, but devises means so that his banished ones are not expelled from him. The woman knows already what Hosea will say about this thing, that God does not reject the children whom he has chosen, not reject Israel, even though they sin. Verse 15, now therefore I have come to speak to this thing to my lord the king, because verse 15, now therefore I have come to speak of this thing to my lord the king, because the people have made me afraid. And your maidservant said, I will now speak to the king. It may be that the king will perform the request of his maidservant, and the king will hear and deliver his maidservant from the hand of the man who would destroy me and my son. Therefore, together from the inheritance of God. Your maidservant said, the word of my lord the king will now be comforting, for as the angel of God, so is my lord the king in discerning good and evil. May the Lord your God be with you. Then the king answered her and said to the woman, Please do not hide from me anything that I ask you. And the woman said, Please let my lord the king speak. So the king said, Is the hand of Joab with you in all this? And the woman said, As you live, my lord the king, no one can turn right or to the left from anything that my lord the king has spoken. For your servant Joab commanded me, and he put all these words in the mouth of your maidservant to bring about this change of affairs. Your servant Joab has done this thing, but my Lord is wise. Again jumped. I'm repeating from verse 19. So the king said, Is the hand of Joab with you in all this? And the woman answered and said, as you live, my lord the king, no one can turn to the right or to the left from anything that my lord the king has spoken. For your servant Joab commanded me, and he put all these words in the mouth of your maidservant to bring about this change of affairs. Your servant Joab has done this thing. But my Lord is wise, according to the wisdom of the angel of God, to know anything that is in the earth. And the Lord King said to Joab, All right, I've granted this thing. Go therefore, bring back the young man Absalom. Then Joab fell to the ground on his face and bowed himself and thanked the king. And Joab said, Today your servant knows that I have found favor in your sight, O my lord, O king, in that the king has fulfilled the request of his servant. So Joab arose and went to Geshur and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. And the king said to him, Return him to his house, but do not let him see my face. So Absalom turned to his own house, but did not see the king's face. Now all Israel, there was no one who was praised as much as Absalom for his good looks. For the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, there was no blemish in him. And when he cut his hair, the hair of his head, at the end of every year, he cut it, because it was heavy on him. And when he cut it, he weighed the hair of his head at 200 shekels according to the king's standard. To Absalom were born 3 sons and 1 daughter, whose name was Tamar. She was a woman of beautiful appearance. And Absalom dwelled 2 full years in Jerusalem, but did not see the king's face. Therefore Absalom sent for Joab to send him to the king, but he would not come to him. And when he sent again the second time, he would not come. So he said to his servants, See Joab's field near mine, and he has barley there. Go and set it on fire. And Absalom's servants set the field on fire. Then Joab arose and came to Absalom's house and said to him, Why have your servants set my field on fire? And Absalom answered to Joab, Look, I sent to you saying, just a minute. Verse 34. No, I'm the wrong chapter. This text is jumping like jumping jack. Somehow reason not behaving right. Sorry. Now there was no one who was praised as much as Absalom for his good looks. For the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, there was no blemish in him. And when he cut his hair of his head at the end of every year, because it was heavy on him, and he cut it, and the weight of his hair on his head was 200 shekels according to the king's standard. To Absalom were born 3 sons, 1 daughter, whose name was Tamar. He named his daughter after his sister that was raped, and she was a beautiful woman of appearance. And Absalom dwelt 2 full years in Jerusalem, but did not see the king's face. Therefore Absalom sent to Joab, and he has his servants. Joab refuses to come to Absalom because he can guess what's going on, and he sends his servants to burn Absalom's field. That brings Joab to Absalom, and Absalom, why have your servant set my field on fire? Absalom said, look, I sent to you saying, come here, so I may send you to the king to say, why have I come from shore? I would be better for me to be there still, and therefore let me see the king's face. But if there is iniquity in me, let the king execute me. So Joab went to the king and told him, and when he had called for Absalom, he came to the king and bowed himself on his face to the ground before the king, and the king kissed Absalom. Here we see David, the great warrior, David the king, very sentimental person. The wise woman of Tekoa convinced him not to kill Absalom, his son, by the trick that Joab had created, sending this woman with this parable about the story about her 2 sons, and one son killed the other, and then the community wants the only son that she has left to be tried and executed for killing his brother. That's the law, murder. And that story touches David's heart, and he understands it, and he asks the woman, who told you to say that? She says, Absalom, and he understands Absalom, and he forgives Absalom for this plot to trick him. And on one hand, that great warrior, great king, the greatest king of Israel and the Israelite history, the Messiah is from his seed. He is the king, the image of a king in Israel is King David. But we see that as angry as he is, he's got no malice inside of him. As angry as he is that his son killed his other son, his eldest son, his firstborn, when he sees Absalom after 4 years that he hasn't seen him, 2 years that he was in shore with his grandfather, and then 2 years now in Jerusalem, he still hasn't seen him. 4 years, and they're neighbors. They live in the same city. And legally, he's the heir to the throne. But when Absalom comes and lays down on his face, humbles himself before the king, then the king kissed Absalom. It's almost like the picture of Joseph in the book of Genesis, reconciling finally with his brothers. And he falls on them and kisses them. You know, there is a command in the New Testament, at the end of the book of Romans, that we, as disciples, when we gather together, we should greet each other with a kiss. The only place I've seen that happen is in the congregation in Teruel Street in Madrid, where my good friend established that congregation, Juan Monroy. May God give him long life. Yeah, that's the only congregation I saw. That everybody that comes in, they don't shake hands, they hug and kiss on the cheek. It's an old Arab, Moroccan, Spanish custom. It's a good custom, but not during the Corona period. So, David kisses Absalom, his son. Chapter 15, verse 1, we'll continue next time. But let me summarize about the character of David. David is a sentimental person. He's got warm emotions. He's also a very wise person. Wise politically and wise as a father and a king. He understands that what Absalom does is very bad. He killed his brother in public in front of all of his other brothers and sisters. No, not sisters. All of his other brothers in Baal Chatzor, where he made that big feast for during the time of the sheep shearing in the springtime, in a big party, and then he has his brother Amnon killed, and he knows what the law says, and he runs to his grandfather Talmai up in the Golan Heights. And he stays there 2 years until David sends Joab to bring him. And Joab brings him, and he waits 2 years and he doesn't see his face. He's still angry because he knows he murdered his brother. How bad could it be? What could be worse of it? That the heir to the throne murdered his brother. And now can he still be the heir of the throne? He is guilty of murdering his brother. It's a political issue. It's a legal issue. But David still forgives him, kisses him, allows him to come by the trick that the wise woman from Tekoa did to him, by the instigation of Joab. But it'll be the introduction of, after he kisses him, the introduction of Absalom here is a very good looking, charming person, beautiful long hair, so long that once a year it weighs 200 shekel of the royal shekel of the king. It was probably, I don't know how much it was, probably a kilo and a half of hair. The guy grew a lot of hair. And this is what's called in German ein Wiederaufnahme. In other words, we are told this information because in the continuation of the story, this information will have great significance. Because Joab will die because of his hair, because of his beauty in the hair. The Holy Spirit is introducing us to this important detail in the future. It does that with the Apostle Paul in the book of Acts. It does that hundreds of times in the Bible. This technique of the writers of the Bible, maybe of the Holy Spirit itself, that it introduces us to a small detail that seems insignificant now, but it will become a very significant detail in the continuation of the story, and we will remember it later. So we finished chapter 14 of 1 Samuel. We will continue the next couple of days with the rest of 1 Samuel, chapter 15, then 16, all the way to the end. But about King David's character, it's shown here very clearly in this passage. About Joab's character is also shown very clearly in this passage. We have seen his character, that he's extremely loyal to the king and sometimes takes the law into his own hand. Like in this case, he takes the initiative to make peace between Absalom and his father David, who is so angry, and puts him above the law. Do you understand this? David, by forgiving his son for murdering his brother and restoring him into the place of the heir to the throne, is putting Absalom and the murder of Amnon above the law. But it's okay. David does that quite often. And Jesus learns from David sometimes as well. So may God bless us, bless you, keep you safe from the corona and from everything else, and continue reading and studying the Bible. Shalom.